I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, as her voice cut through the silence. "You stole my kids!" she screamed. My daughter, the one I raised after she walked away without a word, now calling me a kidnapper. 20 years of sacrifice, love, and quiet strength, and this is how she chose to return, as if all those years meant nothing. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The knock came before sunrise. Helen Marshall stood at the kitchen sink, steam curling from her chipped mug of Folgers. The February wind slapped the window like an angry debt collector. She reached for the dish towel when the second knock came, louder this time, urgent. She opened the front door, and there stood Angela, hair tangled, eyes wild, a child on each hip. Two more stood behind her on the step in pajamas, their breath puffing clouds into the air. "Angela?" Helen whispered, heart tightening. "What in God's name?" "No time," Angela snapped. "Take them." "What are you—" "I said take them." Her voice cracked, high and sharp like a branch breaking. She shoved Jacob and Emily forward. "I can't do this anymore. I'm drowning. You brought your kids here in the dark and just— What? Dump them like garbage?" Helen's voice trembled, rage and fear colliding. Angela blinked, mascara smudged under her eyes. "I never asked for this life, Mom. You had 4 children. And I was 20, Angela hissed. I blinked and my youth was gone. I'm not built for this. You raised me. You do it again." The baby, Emily, whimpered in her footy pajamas. Jacob clutched Helen's housecoat, confused and shivering. Helen's hands went to her chest. "You're leaving them?" Angela's eyes darted down the street. A cab idled at the curb, exhaust mixing with the frost. "There's a bus in Louisville at 10. Don't try to stop me." Helen stepped out barefoot into the snow. "Angela Marshall, if you leave right now, they will remember this moment for the rest of their lives." Angela paused, then turned her head sharply. "Better than remembering me miserable every day." She climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and was gone. The next few weeks blurred into survival. Helen, 48, took emergency leave from her school cafeteria job, then quit altogether when it became clear Angela wasn't coming back. Child welfare came sniffing around, but Helen showed them the handwritten letter Angela left behind, barely a paragraph, scrawled in panic, but enough to keep the kids with her. She filed for temporary guardianship within a month. Bills piled up. The mortgage teetered. The hot water was hit or miss by summer. She worked nights cleaning offices downtown. Came home just in time to pour cereal and braid Sarah's hair before the bus came. Napped in the afternoons with Emily curled against her back like a kitten. She pawned Alan's old hunting rifle, sold the good china, skipped meals so Jacob could have seconds, wore duct-taped boots the second winter rather than buy herself a new pair. But the children grew. David shot up tall, his voice cracking like ice in springtime. Sarah became Helen's shadow, learning to cook by 12. Jacob, fiery and suspicious, never stopped asking why. And Emily, the baby, spoke with a sharpness that felt too old for her small mouth. One night, years later, David came in from his after-school job at the gas station. His hands were raw. His shirt smelled like diesel. He found Helen asleep at the table, unpaid bills fanned out like cards. "Grandma," he said gently, brushing her hair back. "You saved us." Her eyes fluttered open. "I just did what had to be done." By the time the youngest entered high school, Helen's days had a rhythm. Quiet in the morning, rush at night, homework spread across the table, arguments about curfews, stretched spaghetti dinners, love thick in the walls. But Ruth Carson saw what Helen didn't say. "You're burning the wick from both ends," Ruth said, handing her a cup of instant cocoa on a snowy afternoon. "Can't let them fall through the cracks," Helen murmured. "You won't. But mark my words." Ruth's voice softened. "She's going to crawl back. Not because she wants them, but because she wants something. And it's going to burn." Helen stared into the cocoa. She wouldn't dare. Ruth gave her a long look. Wouldn't she? Helen was rinsing the last dish, steam fogging the window above the sink. The house smelled of baked ziti and garlic bread, laughter still echoing from the living room where Jacob and Emily were arguing over a movie. David had work, and Sarah was curled up in the recliner with her nursing textbooks, highlighter in hand. The landline's shrill tone cut through the calm like a knife. She dried her hands, picked it up. Hello? Silence. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 2 decades. I want my kids back. Helen's breath caught. Angela? Her knees went weak. She grabbed the counter. You stole them from me, Angela said, her voice thin and sharp like cracked glass. You had no right. Helen couldn't speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. You think you're some hero? Angela spat. You manipulated everyone. You made sure they hated me. Helen's voice cracked. You left. They were in pajamas on my porch. You didn't even say goodbye. I was overwhelmed, Angela snapped. And you used that to take them. You kidnapped them. Helen's rage finally found air. You dare use that word with me? From the hallway, footsteps. Sarah appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowed. Behind her, Jacob paused mid-stride. Emily stood frozen, wide-eyed. They knew that tone. They felt the tremor in it. Let me be clear, Angela continued, her voice rising. If you don't make this right, I'll make it very public. You'll regret what you did. Helen's grip tightened on the phone. Don't you dare threaten me. Angela chuckled bitterly. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. The line went dead. Helen stood there clutching the phone like it had burned her hand. Sarah was the first to speak. Was that her? Helen nodded slowly. What did she want? Helen looked up, eyes filled with something darker than sadness. She says I stole you. Jacob's face turned crimson. Stole us? She abandoned us, Sarah said, her voice flat with fury. What does she even want now? She'll twist it all, Helen murmured. Turn it inside out to make herself the victim. Emily stepped forward, jaw tight. Can she do anything? She doesn't get to come back after 20 years and pretend she's been wronged, Jacob snapped. Helen stared at them, then past them, like she was trying to see something in the distance. She's not coming for you, she said finally. She's coming for something else. Money maybe, reputation, revenge even. The front door opened. David walked in, smelling of smoke and motor oil, boots heavy on the floor. He looked around at the tense faces. What happened? She called, Sarah said. David's smile vanished. Who? Her, Jacob said. David looked at Helen. What did she say? Helen didn't answer. She moved to the table, sat down hard, and put her head in her hands. Ruth arrived 10 minutes later, called by Sarah in a panic. She said what? Ruth's jaw tensed. Helen recounted every word, voice shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Ruth didn't flinch. Then we get ahead of it. You need to lawyer up Helen, now before she spreads this poison to the wrong ears. Helen looked up slowly. I never asked for this. I just wanted to keep them safe. Ruth reached out, gripped her hand, then fight to keep them that way. Helen looked around at the faces of the children she'd raised. They weren't children anymore. They were strong. They were furious. And they were hers. But Angela had found the one crack in the glass, and she was pressing hard. The knock came just after sunrise. Helen had barely slept. She sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd once braided Sarah's hair and counted out pill bottles for David's asthma. Now it was covered in legal pads and coffee-stained newspaper clippings. Ruth's words echoed in her mind, lawyer up. But she hadn't made the call yet. The knock came again. Not urgent, not friendly, measured, official. Helen rose slowly, heart thrumming. Through the window she saw them. 2 officers in uniform, cruiser idling by the curb. One middle-aged, square-shouldered with a clipboard, the other younger, arms crossed, face unreadable. Sarah appeared behind her. Do you want me to? No, Helen said quietly. I'll do it. She opened the door. Mrs. Helen Marshall? The older officer asked, flipping open a badge. Detective Nolan, this is Officer Parks. We'd like to speak with you regarding a custody-related complaint. Helen's throat felt dry. Come in. They stepped inside, heads swiveling. Family photos lined the walls. David's fireman graduation. Emily in her college hoodie. Jacob under a rusted Camaro. Nolan scanned the living room, where the kids were gathering. Alert now. We received a report from Ms. Angela Marshall. She alleges you unlawfully retained custody of her 4 children after she left the home 20 years ago. Jacob scoffed. You mean abandoned, right? Nolan held up a hand. I understand emotions are high, but we're just here to verify information. I have guardianship documents, Helen said, her voice shaking as she turned toward the hallway. Wait here. Emily appeared from the stairs, already dressed for her internship at the courthouse. I'll get them, Grandma. Nolan eyed her. And you are? Emily, the one she wants back. Apparently, she said, biting the words. Helen placed a trembling hand on the wall to steady herself. I filed papers after she left. No one could find her. No address, no contact, not a dime of child support. I raised them. All four. She left us in footy pajamas in the snow, Sarah added, stepping forward. That's the only legacy she left behind. Is that on record? Parks asked. She left a handwritten letter, Helen said. I still have it. It's with the guardianship filing. Emily returned, a folder in hand. She opened it on the dining table like it was evidence in court. Temporary guardianship in 2006, made permanent in 2007, she said, tapping the dates. Notarized, witnessed, court-stamped. David walked in, just off shift, still in uniform. His face tightened as he took in the scene. Everything okay? Nolan looked up. And you are? David Marshall, eldest of the four. This woman raised me. She raised all of us. He pulled out a worn, folded birth certificate from his wallet and handed it over. Helen Marshall, legal guardian, right there in black and white. Nolan studied it, passed it to Parks, who said nothing. She wants back in now because she smells a payout, Jacob muttered. She's broke. She wants a second chance at a legacy she didn't earn. She called and threatened us, Sarah added. Said Grandma kidnapped us. Kidnap. Nolan closed the folder carefully. The complaint has been logged. We'll write up a report and forward everything to the family court for review. Do you believe her? Emily asked, eyes sharp. We're not here to judge, miss. We're here to document. But you're also here to witness, Ruth said from the doorway. She'd come in quietly. No one had heard her arrive. And what you see here is 4 grown adults defending the woman who held their world together. You'll write that down too, I assume? Nolan hesitated. We're just doing our jobs. Good, Ruth said. Then do it thoroughly. Helen stood outside the courthouse in her Sunday best, one hand trembling against the cool stone railing. Her purse, too small for the mountain of documents Emily insisted she bring, dug into her shoulder. She hadn't stood inside a courtroom since Alan's probate hearing 12 years ago. This felt different. This felt like war. A cold gust slipped under her coat. Ruth tightened the scarf around her neck. You all right? Helen's eyes tracked a black SUV pulling up to the curb. She's here. Angela stepped out, stilettos clicking on pavement, lips painted like a threat. Her hair was salon perfect, her coat newer than anything Helen had owned in a decade. But her face, too smooth, too still, betrayed the strain. She looked like someone pretending to be in control. David, standing just behind Helen, muttered under his breath, "Here comes the circus." Angela strutted past them without a glance, not a nod, not a flicker of recognition for the children she hadn't touched in 20 years. Inside, the marble halls echoed under their footsteps. Room 3B, probate and family court. Mark Dwyer was already waiting. Sharp suit, salt and pepper beard, eyes like cracked granite. Helen hadn't seen him in years, not since he'd helped her navigate Alan's estate. But the way he looked at her now was like a general about to lead an old soldier into battle. "Good to see you, Helen," he said, voice low and steady. "You've aged well." Helen gave a shaky smile. "You too." "I've reviewed the complaint," he said, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "It's absurd. She's alleging you conspired to defraud her of both custody and inheritance. Wants damages retroactive to 2005. She's also filed a separate petition demanding access to Alan's remaining assets." "His savings?" Helen whispered. "There's hardly anything left." "She doesn't care," Mark said. "She smells blood." Emily stepped forward, holding her own set of color-coded binders. "I've been reviewing Ohio family law precedents, specifically post-abandonment guardianship statute and inheritance disqualifications due to estrangement. There's strong precedent in our favor if we file a counterclaim." Mark raised a brow. "Who's this?" "My granddaughter, Emily, law student." Mark smiled faintly. "Remind me to offer her a job when this is over." They moved into the courtroom. Angela sat at the petitioner's table, arms crossed, flanked by a young lawyer with too much hair gel and not enough experience. She looked around the room like she was already owed something. Helen took her seat beside Mark. Her hands trembled slightly as she unzipped her folder. She could feel Angela's gaze land on her. Not maternal, not curious, predatory. "She's playing dirty," Ruth whispered from the gallery, folding her arms. "So play smarter." The bailiff called order. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but Helen's heartbeat pounded like a gavel. "Ms. Marshall, Mark said quietly, leaning toward her. No matter what she says or how she says it, you sit steady. You look calm. You let the truth do the heavy lifting. Helen nodded, but her jaw clenched. The nerves were real, but something colder had started brewing beneath them. Resolve. Angela's attorney stood and began reciting his opening motion, laced with words like alienation, coercion, fraudulent concealment. Angela sat tall, smug, eyes flicking over to the gallery, where Sarah and Jacob sat like stone. Mark stood and countered with calm precision. Documentation of abandonment, proof of guardianship, timelines no one could deny. When he mentioned Helen's financial record, decades of supporting the children without a cent from Angela, the judge's brow lifted. Then Emily stood, and even the opposing counsel's smirk faded. Your Honor, she said clearly, we request leave to submit case law demonstrating that long-term abandonment voids parental inheritance claim, as seen in Leary v. Leary, 2011. The petitioner's claims are not only unfounded, they're structurally impossible under Ohio statute. Helen watched Angela's jaw clench. The courtroom fell still as Judge Franklin entered, tall, gray, weathered. The room responded to his presence like a storm cloud had passed through the door. Even Angela straightened. Let's begin, he said, settling behind the bench. Petitioner may proceed. Angela's attorney, Weston, the slick-haired one, stood. Your Honor, he began, voice oiled and slow. Ms. Angela Marshall comes before this court not to reopen wounds, but to heal them. For years, she has lived with the pain of separation from her children, taken from her under emotionally coercive and legally questionable circumstances. Angela lowered her gaze, her expression carefully crafted. She looked down, as if summoning sorrow. Not one tear fell. She was young, Weston continued, struggling, lacking support. She believed her mother was helping temporarily. Instead, that temporary help became permanent estrangement, enforced, prolonged, and concealed. Helen shifted in her seat, knuckles white against the table edge. Mark Dwyer leaned toward her. Don't react. Let him hang himself. Weston gestured toward Helen. Ms. Marshall acted without legal authority for several months. During that time, she influenced the children, shaped the narrative, blocked contact. My client attempted to reconnect but was denied, repeatedly. Judge Franklin peered over his glasses. You'll need proof of those attempts. Oh, we have it, Weston said, with a sly smile. But I'll reserve that for submission at the appropriate time. Proceed, the judge said dryly. Weston returned to his table and Mark rose without looking at his notes. Your Honor, what Ms. Marshall fails to acknowledge is that parenting doesn't end when life gets hard. It doesn't vanish in the face of inconvenience. My client, Helen Marshall, stepped in not as a thief, but as a protector. The petitioner disappeared without warning, leaving 4 children under the age of 10 at her mother's door. No support, no phone calls, no visits, just absence. He paused. Temporary guardianship was filed within weeks, permanent within a year. Not one challenge, not one objection from Ms. Angela Marshall, until now. Mark returned to his seat. Then Emily rose. She didn't shout. She didn't falter. She simply spoke, each word landing like truth dropped from a rooftop. Your Honor, I was 2 years old when my mother left. My earliest memories are not of her, they are of Helen, my grandmother. She taught me how to read. She taught me how to cook. She helped me write my first essay. She sat with me when I had the flu. I didn't grow up missing something. I grew up having everything I needed. Because of her, Angela didn't look at her, didn't blink. Emily's voice softened, and I would ask the court, with all due respect, where was the petitioner when I had my first recital? When I lost my first tooth? When my brother totaled his first car and thought he'd ruined his life? She looked directly at Angela. You weren't there. Not once. Silence. The judge glanced down at his notes, then looked up. I'd like to hear from the rest of the family. David stood first, hands behind his back. Firefighter, Station 12, he said. I wouldn't be who I am if it weren't for Grandma. Sarah spoke next. I'm a nurse. I pay my taxes. I volunteer at the shelter on Thursdays. And I call her Mom. Always have. Jacob's voice was bitter but firm. You don't get to disappear and come back with a lawyer and pretend that's parenting. Angela leaned in and whispered something to Weston. He nodded. Your Honor, Weston said, standing again. Before we adjourn today, The petitioner would like to submit documentation she believes is critical to understanding her efforts to reconnect. Angela reached into her designer handbag and produced a worn envelope. Several, in fact. Yellowed. Bent. She held them up like they were sacred artifacts. "These are letters," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "Dozens. Sent to this home over the years. None returned. All ignored. I kept copies. Every one of them." Judge Franklin raised an eyebrow. "Is there a reason they were not previously disclosed?" Angela looked at Helen. "Because I didn't think I'd ever be forced to come back." Helen's stomach twisted. She leaned closer to Emily, whispering, "I never saw those. Not a single one." Emily was already scanning the envelopes. Her eyes narrowed. "Something's off," she murmured. Mark stood. "Your Honor, we request time to have these documents examined. The handwriting and postmarks need verification." "Granted," Judge Franklin said. "This session is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 7 business days." The living room was silent except for the scratch of Emily's pen and the rhythmic tick of the old wall clock Helen hadn't changed in 20 years. A dozen envelopes lay fanned out on the coffee table, each one aged, with dates spanning a decade, and all of them, as Emily said flatly, conveniently consistent. Ruth paced behind the sofa with a legal pad in hand. "They smell like lemon water and burnt paper. She probably baked them in the oven to age the paper. People on Pinterest do it for wedding invite." "She forged them," Emily said, not even glancing up. "And poorly." Helen sat in her chair, hands folded in her lap, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might lock shut. Her face hadn't changed since the courthouse. She hadn't cried. She hadn't yelled. But she hadn't smiled either. "She claims I hid them," Helen said quietly. "That I read them and threw them away." Jacob, slumped against the doorway, exploded. "You'd never— God, what is wrong with her?" "She wants to erase the past and rewrite herself into it," Emily murmured, as if letters no one saw somehow prove 20 years of love. Ruth leaned over and picked up one of the envelopes again. "Look at the postmark on this one, 2011. But the zip code extension wasn't in use until 2013. Emily's eyes lit up. "Good catch. I used to work the records desk, remember?" Ruth said, giving her a wink. "You pick up these things." Helen blinked slowly. She really thought this would work. "She's betting on theatrics over facts," Mark Dwyer said as he stepped through the front door, snow still melting on his coat. "But we have an advantage. The truth doesn't panic under pressure." He laid a folder down beside the letters. "I contacted a certified forensic document examiner in Columbus. Fast-tracked the review." Emily leaned forward. "That was quick." "I know the right people," Mark said simply. "Took her less than an hour to flag issues. The ink formulations are modern. A couple written in gel ink that didn't hit market until 2017. Yet she claims these were mailed in 2009, 2010. Total fabrication." Helen didn't speak. She stared at the envelopes like they were ticking. "She sat there in court," David growled from the kitchen, and looked the judge in the eye like she meant it, like she missed us. "She's manipulating perception," Emily said. "Not truth. If the court feels she tried, even weakly, it softens her image, shifts blame. That's her goal." "We need to bury that image before it hardens," Mark said. "I'll request a formal handwriting analysis and subpoena postal tracking data for the return addresses. And I'll draft a counter-exhibit," Emily added, already scribbling. "Line up inconsistencies, show how her timeline breaks. If we pair that with expert testimony." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You planning to graduate before or after you win this case?" Emily grinned for the first time in days. "Both." Helen finally spoke. "This isn't about letters. It never was. She doesn't want the past back. She wants credit for the years she skipped." Her voice shook now, the edges finally cracking. "She left. And now she wants to wear the costume of a mother. Like it fits." Mark looked at her gently. "That's why we fight. Not just to win, but to make sure she never gets to rewrite what you lived." Helen looked at the stack of envelopes one last time, her lip curled. Part grief, part rage. "Burn them," she said softly. Ruth hesitated. "I want them gone," Helen said. "But only after the court sees them for what they are. A prop." Helen didn't own a smartphone, but she didn't need one to feel the change. It started at the grocery store. Whispers at the end of the frozen food aisle. A woman she'd known for years, Becky Phelps, PTA queen and local gossip suddenly forgot how to make eye contact. The cashier, usually all smiles, barely spoke above a mumble. By the time she got home, Ruth was already waiting on the porch, holding a crumpled newspaper. "Don't go inside yet," she said quietly. Helen paused. Ruth handed over the paper. The Cincinnati Courier, front page folded over once, like a punch waiting to land. Grandmother accused of kidnapping own grandkids. Biological mother seeks justice. A photo accompanied it, grainy, zoomed in. Helen entering the courthouse, shoulders hunched. She looked frail, guilty. "I never talked to anyone," Helen said, voice thin. "She did," Ruth replied. "Angela." She went to the press. Helen's hands shook as she read the pull quote. "I just wanted to see my babies. She shut me out." Angela Marshall. Inside the house, the kids had already seen it. David was pacing. Jacob had the paper's digital version pulled up on his phone, his finger jabbing the screen like it might bleed. "She's getting traction," he growled. "People are believing this crap." "There's an interview schedule," Sarah said, arms folded tightly. "Angela's going on local morning TV tomorrow. She's doing damage control before we even get to court." "She's doing preemptive damage," Emily corrected, pulling her laptop over. "And it's working." Reddit threads, Facebook posts. A few of the comments are already calling Grandma a custody thief. Helen didn't say a word. She walked into the kitchen, set the paper on the counter, and stared at it like it had caught fire. David followed her in. "You okay?" "No," she said calmly, "but I'm used to that." Emily stood from the couch. "We're not letting her control the story." She grabbed her phone and started filming right there in the living room. "I'm Emily Marshall," she said to the camera, "and I'm here to tell the truth. My siblings and I weren't stolen. We were rescued. My biological mother left us in the middle of winter. No warning, no food, no hugs goodbye, just frost and silence." Jacob stepped into frame next. "You know who fed me when I broke my arm in 8th grade and couldn't work at the garage? Helen. You know who helped me pay my first rent check? Helen. The woman she's dragging through the press. Raised us." Sarah chimed in last, voice shaking but firm. "You don't abandon 4 kids, disappear for 2 decades, and then come back expecting applause. She's not fighting for family, she's fighting for control." David posted the video to his social accounts. Sarah pushed it to her hospital's internal bulletin board. Emily sent it to reporters. They didn't beg for sympathy, they told the truth. Clean and sharp. And it caught fire. By Monday morning, Number Team Helen was trending on Cincinnati Twitter. Calls came in from media outlets wanting interviews, former teachers, neighbors, even the retired social worker who had signed off on the guardianship years ago came forward with statements backing Helen. "The court should be honoring this woman, not questioning her," said Mrs. Dupler, the social worker, in one clip that aired during a local news segment. Angela Marshall vanished. Helen saved those kids. Live on air WLXV morning show. Angela sat across from a young anchor, legs crossed, makeup immaculate. She wore sorrow like a coat that didn't quite fit. "I only ever wanted to be reunited with them," she said, blinking fast. "I sent letters. I called. No one picked up. It was like I never existed to them." The anchor nodded solemnly until her earpiece buzzed. She froze. "Ah, sorry to interrupt," the anchor said carefully, "but we've just received a statement from all 4 Marshall grandchildren. It's airing now across our affiliate feed." Angela blinked. "Would you like to respond?" the anchor asked. Angela looked directly into the camera, but something slipped in her face. Not fear, exactly. Exposure. She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated. Just long enough. Angela arrived late. Not enough to delay proceedings, just enough to be noticed. Her heels echoed down the marble hallway like punctuation marks. Behind her, her lawyer, Weston, looked pale. Mark Dwyer clocked it immediately. Something's shifted, he muttered to Emily. Watch their body language. Inside the courtroom, the gallery buzzed faintly. Journalists now lined the back row, notebooks in hand, recording devices at the ready. Team Helen had turned the tide, and the press had caught wind of blood in the water. The judge entered, and silence fell. "We're here today to review the motion for financial discovery," Judge Franklin said. "Counsel, proceed." Mark stood, composed. "Your Honor, based on recent filings by the petitioner claiming entitlement to the remainder of Alan Marshall's estate, the defense moved to compel full financial disclosure of Ms. Angela Marshall's record, income, assets, liabilities, and relevant communication." He paused, sliding a stack of documents across the table toward the bench. "We've reviewed them, and what we found paints a very different picture of intent." The judge flipped through the folder. His expression didn't change, but the silence thickened. "According to bank statements," Mark continued, "Ms. Marshall has accumulated over $92,000 in gambling debt over the last 3 years. Multiple accounts flagged for overdraft, a mortgage in default, and 6 declined applications for personal loans in the last 14 months." He turned. "She isn't here to reunite with family. She's here to settle debts." Angela's jaw twitched. She said nothing. Mark returned to his seat. Weston rose slowly, clearing his throat. "Financial hardship isn't a crime, Your Honor. Many Americans struggle." "This isn't about struggle," Judge Franklin interrupted. "It's about motive." Emily rose, calm, measured. "Your Honor, the inheritance she's seeking isn't some vast fortune. It's the leftover equity from a house and a modest retirement account from Alan Marshall, a man she hadn't seen since 2001. And let the record show, he left no will naming her. Helen Marshall has been solely executor for over a decade, and no one challenged it, until Angela's bankruptcy court flagged the family trust 2 months ago." She clicked her pen once, sharp. "The math adds up. So does the motive." Angela's eyes snapped toward her. "You little..." "Careful," Judge Franklin said, holding up a hand without even looking up from the paperwork. "Ms. Marshall, you'll compose yourself or I'll hold you in contempt." Helen, sitting just behind Emily, didn't flinch. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the courtroom floor like it held all the years she'd held together. The judge finally looked up. "I've read the filings, I've reviewed the record, and I must say, this is not a flattering portrait. You claim you sent letters, you claim you tried to be present, but the only timeline consistent in these documents is a financial one, and it leads straight to Ms. Helen Marshall's doorstep." Angela shifted in her seat. Emily leaned toward her grandmother, whispering with a small smirk, "Got her." Helen didn't smile. She didn't need to. Outside the courtroom, a low hum built among the reporters. Mark buttoned his coat. "The judge is leaning." "He's more than leaning," Emily said. "He's circling." Angela looked like she wanted to bite through her tongue. Jacob muttered, "That'll be tomorrow's headline." But as they reached the front steps, Ruth was already scrolling through her phone. Her face fell. Guys?" They turned. Ruth held up her phone. On it, a breaking news alert. "Breaking. Custody court petitioner. Angela Marshall files for emergency injunction against Helen Marshall, claims undue psychological harm to adult children." David frowned. "What the hell does that even mean?" "She's trying to spin the story again," Emily muttered. "She's not losing gracefully. She's panicking." By the time the bailiff called the court to order, the press row was full. Local news vans idled outside in double rows. Bloggers, legal podcasters, and even a court sketch artist had claimed their corners of the gallery. But inside, the tension didn't come from cameras. It came from Helen's silence. She hadn't spoken a word all morning. Not when Angela strutted in. Not when Weston smirked. Not when whispers followed her from the hallway. She just sat, poised, spine straight, hands clasped neatly over a manila folder like it held her entire life. The judge motioned to Mark. "Ready to proceed?" Mark nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls David Marshall." David took the stand in uniform, badge gleaming under the court lights. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and met the judge's gaze without blinking. "I was 8 when our mother left," he began. "She didn't say goodbye. She didn't call. She didn't check in. Helen, my grandmother, stepped in and filled every role. Every single one." He glanced towards Angela. "My mom disappeared, and the woman sitting here raised 4 scared, abandoned kids like her life depended on it. Because it did." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Next, Sarah took the stand. She clasped her hands tightly, knuckles white, voice trembling but steady. "I didn't know what it meant to have a mother until I realized I already had one. Helen was there for fevers, for spelling bees, for the day I got my nursing license. Angela wasn't even a ghost in our lives. She was air." She took a shaky breath. "I don't want anything from her, but I won't let her steal credit for a life she refused to live." Then Jacob, blunt, defiant. "I was 5. She left me in pajamas, told me she'd be back." He scoffed. "She never came back." "But Helen stayed. She stayed when I ran away in high school. Stayed when I flunked out of shop class. Stayed when I crashed her car and thought I'd get kicked out. You know what she said? He turned to the jury. She said, "You're not leaving. You're learning." Jacob's voice caught. "That's a mother. That's a home." Angela stared straight ahead, frozen, but her fingers tapped furiously against her knee. Then Emily rose. She didn't take the stand. She approached the judge's bench with a stack of documents and a cold, razor-edged calm. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibits F through K, forensic analysis of the forged letters, postal inconsistencies, and data from Ms. Marshall's bankruptcy proceeding, showing the exact date she filed and the timing of her lawsuit against my grandmother." She turned slowly to the jury. "This is not about family. This is about timing, about desperation." Her voice was steady but sharp. "We did not deny her love. She denied us presence. And now she wants a narrative that suits her finances, not the facts." Even the court stenographer paused for a second. Judge Franklin cleared his throat. "Ms. Emily Marshall, you may have been born into this case, but you're presenting like someone twice your age." Emily nodded once and sat back down. Angela whispered something to Weston. "Urgent, fast." He whispered back and glanced toward the judge, but didn't move. Judge Franklin leaned forward. "I want to be crystal clear. I'm seeing a pattern of revisionism, unsupported by documentation and testimony that contradicts not just the law, but basic decency. I'm not moved by theatrics. I'm moved by truth." Angela twitched in her chair. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Then a clerk entered quietly from a side door, approached the bench, and handed the judge a sealed envelope. He opened it, read, then looked up slowly. His gaze hardened. "I'm calling a recess," he said curtly. "Counsel, chambers, now." The door closed behind them with a soft click, but the air inside the judge's chambers felt loud, full of consequence. Judge Franklin sat at his desk like a stone monument, fingers laced, unreadable. Weston looked visibly rattled, a sheen of sweat rising along his hairline. Angela, arms crossed, radiated a cold arrogance, but her eyes flickered. She knew something was coming. Mark remained standing, steady and silent. Helen sat beside him, calm as still water. Emily stood behind her, hands folded tight behind her back. The judge broke the silence with a single sheet of paper. "This," he said, tapping the desk, "is a sworn affidavit from Mr. Keith Harmon, one of my courtroom clerks." Angela barely blinked. "In this document, Mr. Harmon states that on Tuesday evening, after court had adjourned, the petitioner approached him in the parking garage. She offered him an envelope containing $5,000 in exchange for losing key evidence related to the guardianship records filed in 2007. The room didn't move. Judge Franklin looked directly at Angela. "Ms. Marshall, is that true?" Angela shifted, slow and deliberate. That's not how it happened." "No?" Franklin asked, voice flat. Weston opened his mouth. "Your Honor, I haven't had time to verify the authenticity of—" The judge held up a hand. "He recorded it, Mr. Weston. Audio. It's on file. Would you like to hear it?" Angela's eyes finally flicked, first to Weston, then to Helen. Helen remained still as stone. "I was emotional," Angela said. "It was a misunderstanding." "No," Judge Franklin snapped. "A misunderstanding is missing a court date. A bribe is a felony. This is obstruction of justice and attempted evidence tampering. I'm referring this to the district attorney." Angela's breath hitched. "You can't—" "Oh, I can," he cut in. "And I will." Weston sat down heavily. Ruth, standing behind Helen, leaned in just enough to whisper, "She's hanging herself," and she brought the rope. Mark straightened, his voice calm but sharpened now like a blade being drawn. "Your Honor, we ask the court to consider this pattern of behavior when weighing all outstanding motion. This isn't an isolated lapse. It's a campaign of deception, manipulation, and now criminal interference. We move for full dismissal of the suit, with prejudice." The judge didn't respond immediately. He turned toward Helen. "You've remained notably silent through all of this, Mrs. Marshall. Do you have anything to say?" Helen lifted her chin, then rose slowly. She didn't raise her voice. "I've seen a lot in my life," she said, "and I've kept quiet through most of it. But I've never seen someone so committed to destroying what they never helped build." She paused, looked directly at Angela. "You didn't lose your children. You left them. There's a difference. Angela opened her mouth, then shut it. She had nothing left to spin. That evening, Helen's house rain tapped gently at the windows. The whole family sat clustered in the living room, not celebrating, not relaxing, just sitting, together, processing. Emily had her laptop open, refreshing court tracking updates. Jacob paced. David had a cold beer untouched in his hand. Sarah sat curled in a blanket, watching Helen. She's unraveling, Ruth said, breaking the silence, piece by piece. Mark, standing in the hallway on his phone, returned to the room. I just got off with the DA's office. They're officially investigating Angela. Preliminary charges could be filed by the end of the week. No one cheered. It wasn't over. But the tide had turned. Angela Marshall sat alone in a holding cell, mascara smeared across her cheek like a bruise, her designer blazer draped over her knees to avoid the cold concrete bench. She'd spent the night without her phone, her stylist, or her spin team, and for the first time in 20 years, no one had answered when she called. Her arraignment had been brief. 1 count obstruction, 1 count attempted bribery. She'd posted bail by 7:15 a.m., but by then, the photo had already gone viral. Mugshot. Angela Marshall, 42. Custody petitioner accused of bribing court clerk. Hashtag. Number liar mother Marshall residence - kitchen table, 9:40 a.m. The television played on mute as Helen sliced apples for a tart. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and quiet, defiant. David scrolled through his phone across from her, his firefighter radio crackling faintly at his hip. She's out already, he said. But it doesn't matter. Twitter's eating her alive. Since when do we care what Twitter thinks? Helen asked, without looking up. We don't, Jacob said, entering from the porch. But it's nice to watch someone else finally see what we've seen our whole lives. Emily appeared. Next, laptop under one arm, her face sharp with quiet satisfaction. Channel 9 just ran a full retraction of their original story, called you Hero Grandma. They're planning a follow-up piece. Sarah, pouring coffee, snorted. Took them long enough. Helen didn't respond. She just laid another strip of crust across the top of the tart. You okay? Ruth asked gently, watching her. I'm fine, Helen said. I'm just tired. Of her? Ruth asked. Helen looked up, eyes distant. Number of the Wait WLXV newsroom, noon segment. The anchor's tone had shifted from neutral to clearly apologetic. This morning, we received updated footage confirming that Angela Marshall, who previously accused her mother of kidnapping her children, has been formally investigated for tampering with evidence in that very case. Meanwhile, Helen Marshall, who raised 4 grandchildren after her daughter's sudden departure, has been hailed on social media as a local symbol of quiet resilience and sacrifice. Clips played. A teary-eyed social worker from 2006 praising Helen's devotion. A neighbor recounting how Helen once walked to the pharmacy through a snowstorm to fill David's inhaler prescription. Back in the living room, Jacob scoffed. Took 20 years and a court case to get people to see her. Helen waved him off. It's not about that. Never was. Emily, eyes fixed on her laptop, said softly. Angela just released a statement. They all turned toward her. Emily read aloud. The legal process has been deeply flawed and biased. I acted out of emotion, and I regret certain decisions, but I maintain that my rights were violated. My children were taken from me under false pretenses. This is far from over. Far from over? Sarah repeated, incredulous. She's spinning again, Ruth muttered, drowning in her own story, but still trying to control the narrative. David looked at Helen. What do we do now? Helen stood and walked to the sink, rinsing her hands. We wait. Courtroom 3B. The following day, Angela sat rigid, lips pursed, arms crossed over a navy blouse that failed to soften her bitterness. Her lawyer looked exhausted, hair disheveled, suit wrinkled. Helen entered quietly with Mark, Emily close behind. She didn't glance at Angela. She didn't need to. Judge Franklin took the bench with a noticeable finality in his posture. This court has reviewed the full timeline of events, considered the forensic reports, the character testimony, and the petitioner's recent criminal investigation. He paused. I will issue a final ruling in 72 hours. A hush spread across the courtroom. Angela stiffened. Weston exhaled in relief. Or was it fear? Emily whispered, he's about to make history. Mark leaned over to Helen. That timeline gives us room. I want to get one more statement on record, from you. Helen blinked. You want me to testify? No, he said. I want you to close. The courtroom had never felt so still. Even the press had stopped typing. Helen stood at the witness stand, her hands folded, not gripping, not ringing, just resting. The microphone in front of her crackled faintly, but she didn't lean in. She didn't need amplification. She was the voice. Mark Dwyer gave her a small nod from the defense table, then stepped back. Mrs. Marshall, you may speak. Helen's eyes didn't go to the judge, or the jury, or the reporters in the back. She looked straight ahead, like she was speaking into time itself. I'm not good at speeches, she said plainly. Never have been. Pause. But I'm good at staying. A single sentence, and half the jury leaned forward. I stayed when my daughter left 4 children on my doorstep. No winter coat, no child support, no instruction, just fear. Her voice didn't shake, but it scraped a little, like gravel beneath calm. I didn't ask for applause. I didn't even ask for help. I just did what needed doing, because someone had to. Angela sat stone-faced at the petitioner's table, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. Helen continued. I worked nights, cleaned office buildings, made casseroles stretch 3 days, missed sleep, missed birthdays, missed Alan's last fishing trip because Emily had the flu and needed cool compresses every 2 hours, and I don't regret any of it. She blinked slowly. Not a tear. Not yet. I taught David how to tie a tie. Sat on the floor with Sarah to learn her anatomy flashcards when I hadn't taken biology in 40 years. I picked up Jacob from the police station once and didn't say a word, just made meatloaf and told him to wash up. And Emily. Helen finally glanced back at her granddaughter, who sat rigid in the gallery. She taught me how to fight. With words. With facts. With backbone. David swallowed hard, his arm draped protectively over Sarah's shoulder. I'm not a perfect woman, Helen went on. I've made mistakes, but none of them were walking away. Finally, her voice cracked. And I don't want anything from this court. Not money, not medals. I just want the record to show. I stayed. I showed up when it wasn't convenient. I did the hard part. She turned her head slightly, looked at Angela. Not with rage, not pity. Something quieter, sadder. And if being a mother means anything, it has to mean that. The silence stretched, sacred now. The kind of hush reserved for funerals and prayers. Then, a quiet sound from the gallery. Sarah crying. David's jaw clenched. Emily's eyes welled but didn't fall. She didn't break. Not in front of the woman who had nearly erased their history. Even Judge Franklin looked away for a beat, clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses. Helen stepped down from the stand with quiet dignity. She didn't look back. She returned to her seat and placed her hands in her lap again. Mark whispered, "You just closed it." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Courtroom vestibule. 15 minutes later, reporters scrambled through the double doors, voices loud, cameras flashing. Inside, the jury had been dismissed for deliberation. The judge would reconvene in 48 hours for the final ruling. Angela had refused to look at anyone as she exited. Her lawyer walked 3 paces behind her now. Helen sat quietly on a bench near the wall. Emily approached her. You okay? I said my piece, Helen replied, folding her coat over her lap. Now we let the truth breathe. The room held its breath. Everyone had shown up. Reporters, neighbors, teachers, old friends. Even the bailiff looked nervous as he opened the doors. Angela arrived first, face contoured to neutrality, her posture rigid. She wore gray this time. No navy, no red, no flash. Her lawyer looked freshly shaven but dead behind the eyes. Helen entered with less ceremony. No makeup. Her church shoes. A single silver pin on her collar. A fire department insignia David had given her the day he graduated. Emily walked beside her, then paused to hold the door for Mark, who carried a binder and nothing else. They took their seats in silence. When Judge Franklin entered, no one rose late. He didn't look up right away, just opened a folder, flipped through a few pages, then removed his glasses and finally met the room's collective gaze. This court has reviewed all evidence submitted over the last 17 days, he began. It has considered testimony, documentation, and the conduct of all parties involved. Angela shifted in her seat. The judge continued. It is the opinion of this court that the claims brought by the petitioner, Ms. Angela Marshall, are not only unfounded, but dangerously manipulative. They constitute an abuse of the legal system and an emotional violation of the family she abandoned. The courtroom didn't move. Even breath felt like a risk. Therefore, Judge Franklin said, this court dismisses all claims against Mrs. Helen Marshall with prejudice. Full guardianship, legal history, and inheritance rights remain unchanged. No further legal challenges will be entertained on this matter by this court. The final gavel struck like thunder. David exhaled so hard it almost became a sob. Sarah clutched his arm. Jacob sat frozen, staring, straight ahead. Emily didn't move. Then Helen stood. Not fast, not triumphant, just certain. She turned to the children, the adults now, and smiled the way only someone who'd endured could. The way someone who'd carried too much, for too long, finally lets it down. And they came to her, all at once. David first, lifting her like she weighed nothing. Sarah buried her face in Helen's shoulder. Jacob, for once, didn't try to play it cool. He wept openly, right there in front of reporters. Emily, silent as ever, wrapped her arms around all of them. They didn't care who watched. Angela watched, from across the courtroom, her face unreadable now. Rage no longer served her. Neither did grief. Only a bitter void remained. She stood, slow and stiff, and exited through the side door without a word. The courtroom buzzed behind her. Journalists whispering, someone clapping, a bailiff chuckling quietly. Helen simply stood there, eyes closed, breathing. No flashbulbs, no sound, just freedom. That evening, Marshall House, front yard. The sun was dipping just behind the trees, casting gold over the porch Helen had painted every spring for 20 years. She stepped out, barefoot, curious why the lights in the backyard had flicked on. She'd left them off. The sound of laughter carried from behind the fence. "Emily?" she called. "Jacob." The screen door creaked as she stepped down the stairs. Then she rounded the corner and froze. The entire backyard had been transformed. String lights draped through the trees. Folding chairs lined the grass. A small table held framed pictures. David in uniform, Sarah at nursing school graduation, Jacob covered in grease under a car, Emily on the courthouse steps. All 4 kids, all raised by one woman. A banner hung from the fence, for the one who stayed. "Surprise," Ruth said softly from beside the grill, holding a glass of sweet tea. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah approached, blinking back tears. "We didn't want to wait for the newspapers to get it right." David grinned. "We figured it was time you heard what we really think of you." Jacob lit a bonfire in the old pit Alan had built. Emily stepped up last. "You've spent 20 years giving. Tonight, we give back." The bonfire crackled as the first neighbors began to arrive. Some carried casserole dishes wrapped in foil. Others brought folding chairs, covered pies, plastic cups. No one needed an invitation. They'd seen the headlines. They'd watched the courtroom clips on local news. They'd read the retraction, seen the footage of Helen stepping down from the stand with tears in her eyes. Now they showed up with potato salad and lawn chairs like it was the 4th of July. Ruth stood by the gate, greeting everyone like the unofficial marshal of the Marshall House. "Backyard's open. Dessert goes on the porch. Tell your kids not to jump on the trampoline. It's older than half the people here." Helen sat in the center of it all, confused and blinking. It wasn't just a gathering, it was a movement. The string lights twinkled overhead. Someone had set up a Bluetooth speaker under the old oak, playing soft, nostalgic tunes. Everything from Otis Redding to Tracy Chapman. Someone else had dug up a collection of old neighborhood photos and pinned them to a corkboard near the grill. Helen at bake sales. Helen at David's firefighter ceremony. Helen walking Sarah to the bus stop in the snow. "I don't understand," she whispered to Ruth. "You don't have to," Ruth said, slipping her arm through Helen's. "You just sit. Let love do the work tonight." David clinked a fork against a glass near the fire pit. "All right," he called out. "If I could get everyone's attention for a moment." The murmurs quieted. He cleared his throat. "We've said a lot about what Helen did for us over the years, but tonight we want to talk about who she is." A pause. "She's the reason I joined the department. Not just because she raised me, but because she taught me what duty really looks like. It's not always medals and drama. Sometimes it's just doing the hard thing, quietly, every day." He looked over to where Helen sat. "You did that, Grandma. You are that." Next, Sarah stepped forward. "I had a patient once, This woman, who told me love is what stays behind after memory fades, that love roots. And I realized she wasn't talking about her husband, she was talking about her mother. Sarah turned to Helen, her voice catching. So I'm saying it now, out loud, in front of everybody. She took a breath. You're not Grandma, you're Mom. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Helen's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling, but she didn't speak. Jacob, standing nearby with his sleeves rolled up, looked down at his beer and smirked. I'm not good at speeches, he muttered, so I'll keep it simple. He raised his glass. She never left. All around, others nodded. Old neighbors, teachers, the mailman who remembered Helen putting salt on the driveway so he wouldn't slip in winter. Even Ruth dabbed her eyes with a paper napkin. Emily stepped to the front, holding her phone. WLXV wants to livestream this, she said. They're calling it a community tribute. I told them sure, but they can't edit anything. She smiled gently. This is the uncut version. She turned the camera toward the crowd. A reporter near the gate whispered into her mic. A spontaneous outpouring of gratitude tonight in a Cincinnati backyard, where one woman's fight for her family has become something far larger. And in the center of it all sat Helen, too stunned to speak, hands trembling in her lap. Ruth leaned over. You see now? She said softly. It's not about courts or headlines. It's about who shows up when you don't ask. That's the only math that matters. Love, minus condition, plus years, divided by truth. Helen shook her head in disbelief, eyes wet. I never thought I'd see this. Emily leaned in close, whispering just loud enough for the family to hear. Oh, we're not done yet. The sky hung low and soft, bruised with gold and lavender. The last of the laughter faded into the backyard as twilight settled like a warm quilt over the quiet street. Helen sat on the porch swing, her legs tucked beneath her, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chamomile tea. The wood creaked gently beneath her, old but steady. Like her. On the lawn, paper lanterns swayed in the late summer breeze. Somewhere behind the fence, David and Jacob argued good-naturedly over who burned the cornbread. Sarah refilled drinks, and Ruth tried to keep a sparkler away from a curious toddler who definitely wasn't invited, but somehow showed up anyway. Helen didn't mind. She sat still, not tense, not guarded, not waiting for the next twist in a long, cruel story. Just still. Emily stepped onto the porch, barefoot and holding her shoes in one hand. She eased down beside Helen on the swing. For a while, neither of them said anything. Crickets took up the silence. Then Emily said, You won twice. Helen glanced sideways. In court, Emily continued, and in life. Helen smiled, faint but real. I never lost. They sat a little longer. The light dimmed to blue. Inside the house, someone lit the candle that always sat on the kitchen windowsill. Its glow spilled across the porch rail like a memory, small and golden. I used to sit right here, Helen said softly. Every night, back when they were little. I'd count heads after dinner, then come out here just to make sure the world hadn't fallen apart while I was busy keeping it together. Emily looked at her, then looked away. And now? Helen took a breath. Now it can fall apart all at once. We've already built something stronger. From the backyard came a burst of laughter. Sarah's, unmistakable and loud. Ruth's voice followed, full of sass and sweetness. Then Jacob again, groaning in mock disgust. Emily rested her head on Helen's shoulder. You know, people ask me all the time what makes someone strong. Helen took a sip of her tea. What do you tell them? Emily smiled. I tell them I lived with the answer. Helen closed her eyes for a moment, letting it settle. The porch swing swayed gently again. The candle flickered in the window behind them, casting shadows that looked like memories. A rocking chair, a child with a fever, an old man packing fishing gear. Helen opened her eyes. No ghosts, only grace. She exhaled slowly, watching the sky deepen into stars. The front door creaked open, and David leaned out. Y'all coming back in? Sarah's telling that story about the choir concert again, and Jacob's pretending like he didn't wet his pants. Emily laughed. Helen didn't move. Tell them. We'll be right there. David nodded and closed the door behind him. Emily stood and stretched. I'm grabbing a slice of pie before Jacob eats the last one. She started down the steps, then paused halfway. Helen was still watching the sky. Hey, Emily said gently. You okay? Helen nodded once. Then she said it. Not loud. Not for anyone but herself. She vanished 20 years ago. I stayed, and love stayed with me.